And this morning we're going to be looking at a very familiar story from Scripture, the story of David and Goliath. So we're going to read from 1 Samuel chapter 17, read the whole chapter, and I have got my glamorous assistant to come and do the reading.
One Samuel chapter 17. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Socoh in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Damim between Socoh and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with a valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze, weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs, he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time, he was very old. Jesse's 3 eldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second, Abinadab, and the third, Shema. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days, the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to the camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines." Early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines, facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, This is what will be done for the man who kills him. When Eliab, David's eldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." "Now what have I done?" said David. "Can't I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man, and he's been a warrior since his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I'm not used to them." So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from its sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Sharaim road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem. He put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. As Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is that young man?" Abner replied, "As surely as you live, your majesty, I don't know." The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked him. David said, "I'm the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem."
Thank you, Sue. It's a long reading. It's always worrying when you're married to a Bible translator and she's going to read. At least it was English this time. Okay, it's a story that's very familiar. I don't suppose there's anyone in the room who's unaware of it. Some of the details, come and go, but we know roughly what happened. And very often, as this story is presented, I find it overwhelming. There's a story, a little boy, he kills a giant, and by implication, we should all go off and kill giants too. If David could do it, you can do it. And I find that a bit overwhelming. If you want an idea of what David was up against, we could do this as a visual aid if it weren't for health and safety. But the height of David was basically Simon standing on a table. So we're not allowed to do that, but thankfully. But if you can imagine that, that's what David was facing. And we are told, because David could kill Goliath, you can go off and kill Goliath too. However, I'm not entirely convinced that that's an accurate portrayal of what happened in the story, nor is it the moral that we're supposed to take from it. So what I'd like to do, we're going to break it down in three parts. I'd like just first of all to explain a bit of what's going on here, just some background that may not be obvious, and then two other sections, each which give a different lesson as from the passage. So what's going on? You've got the Israelite army, one side of a valley. You've got the Philistines, another. The Philistines and Israelites have been enemies for decades by now. They're two groups living close to each other. The Philistines are quite expansionist and keep coming into Israelite territory. There have been battles. Basically, 1 Samuel up to this point is a story of scraps with the Philistines. But fighting in those days wasn't quite as it is today. You see, they weren't yet civilized. They hadn't invented guns so that they could kill people from a long distance away. We're now very civilized. We can kill people without seeing them. In those days, they couldn't do that. And the only way to kill someone was either to poke them with something sharp or hit them with something heavy. I hope I'm not being too technical at this point, but basically you had to whack somebody with something to kill them. And that is something which human beings don't like to do. There are two reasons. One, it's actually a pretty unpleasant thing to do to another person. And secondly, if you get close enough to poke somebody with a sharp stick or a sword, you're also close enough for them to poke you. It's risky. And basically, armies were reluctant to fight. And the job of a general was basically to gee up his forces so that they would fight the other enemy. And one of the ways that this was done was by choosing a champion who would challenge somebody from the other army in single combat, and so frighten them that they would run away Because when the other army is running away, you can chase after them and poke them in the back. It's much easier to encourage your army to engage with the enemy if the enemy are running away. And so what you've got here basically are the Philistines who've got this super weapon of Simon standing on a table, Goliath, this huge bloke with a bronze sword. We're in the Bronze Age. It's, you know, they've got a win-win situation. They send Goliath out. They know that whoever the Israelites send out, Goliath's going to make mincemeat of them. The Israelites will all run away. The Philistines can chase after them and kill them. So that's what's happening. Meanwhile, the soldiers on either side, certainly the Israelites, are thinking, as long as nobody is daft enough to go out and fight Goliath, we can sit around here brewing up our cups of tea and don't have to do any fighting. The last thing they want is anybody to engage with Goliath, because they think that if that happens, they'll get killed. And that's why when David says, "Who is this Philistine?" his brother says, "Shut up. Be quiet. This is none of your business." Because as far as David's brother's concerned, if somebody goes out to fight the Philistines, his life is in danger. Far rather just sit it out. They'd been there for 40 days, another month and a half or so, the rains would come and everybody would have to go back and look after their fields. The last thing the Israelite army wanted was actually to get into a fight. So that's what's actually happening. Now, David. We all know that David's a small boy. We've seen the pictures, seen Sunday school pictures. He's described as a boy, he's described as a young man. And it's a really inspiring story that this young boy kills a giant. Except the word used for young boy actually talks about somebody under the age of 30. We don't know how old David was, but he could have been well grown. And then, if you look on to, well, we know David's not a trained soldier, but if you look at verses 38 and 39, they put Saul's armor on him. And I don't know if you've seen the same Sunday school books that I have, or has anybody seen the VeggieTales version of this? The cartoon. Basically, David is drowned by this armor. And he can't fight because the armor doesn't fit him. The passage never says the armor didn't fit him. It says David wasn't used to it. Think about it for a moment. Saul and his commanders were seasoned military veterans. They wouldn't have given David armor that didn't fit. They were sending him out to fight. They'd give him armor that was suitable for him. It doesn't make sense otherwise. And what do we know about Saul? We know that Saul, from 1 Samuel 9, Saul was a head taller than everybody else. And yet they chose Saul's tunic to give to David. Can I suggest that David was actually a big bloke? He wasn't as big as Goliath, but he wasn't little. And then read on, verses 34 and 35. David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off the sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, I struck it, and I killed it." Now, I don't know how many of you have gone into hand-to-hand combat with a lion or a bear. It's not something that happens very often in Craven. It certainly not happens in the 4 years we've been living here. But, you know, never know. Some of you might have done so. Lions and bears are big. And when a lion or a bear came and stole a lamb from the flock, David ran after it with a stick, beat the thing around the chops, and killed the lion and took the sheep back. Does that sound to you like the action of a small boy? David was a hard lad. He lived out in the fields. He was tough. And he was probably quite big. He wasn't as big as Goliath. He wasn't a trained soldier. The odds of David taking on Goliath and winning were very small. But we need to realize what's going on here isn't quite the way that the folk tales and the Sunday school stories sometimes present it. So we'll come back and see what lessons we can pull from the story in a second. But we're going to sing at home or hum our next song, Why This Fear and Unbelief? That's what David said to the armies around him. Why this fear and unbelief? So if you're in the building and you'd like to stand, if you're at home and you'd like to stand, that's grand. So we've got two armies either side of a valley facing each other. The Philistines have got this secret weapon of Goliath, who's challenging the Israelite army. The Israelite army are scared. They don't want anybody to go up against Goliath. They want to try and sit this out. And then you get this young man, David, a sheep farmer, who's got a pretty good record against lions and bears, but he's never been a soldier. And he says, what's going on? Now, it's important to remember that it was Saul who was king. And it was Saul's job to lead the army. And in the circumstances where the army was being challenged, where Goliath was coming and defying not just Israel's army, but Israel's God, it was Saul's job to do something about it. Now, either he could go out and meet Goliath himself. He was a seasoned warrior. He was a big bloke, not as big as Goliath, but he was still big. And he was king. And if he wasn't going to go out himself, he had to find somebody else to do it. That was Saul's job. He was king. But what do we find? Saul and his generals were scared and hid in their tents, wondering what should do. But the thing is, as I mentioned, the book of 1 Samuel, up till this point, is basically a story of Israel and the Philistines fighting. And Saul had led Israel to victory after victory. In chapter 14, just going back 3 chapters, there's a miraculous victory. If you go back to chapter 7, verse 12, there's an interesting little incident in which the prophet Samuel leads Israel to victory over the Philistines. And it's an absolutely miraculous victory. It shouldn't have happened, but it did. And Samuel takes a stone, big stone, a memorial stone, and places it and calls it Ebenezer, which means up till this point, God has helped us. It's put there as a memorial to say, when we were facing the Philistines, when everything was going wrong, God stepped in and God saved us. Up till this point, God has helped us. And Saul had forgotten all of that. Saul had lived through it, but he'd forgotten it. He'd been a soldier, he'd seen victories, he'd seen God step in, and woof, one whiff of a giant, and all that flies from Saul's memory. Compare this to David. David had never, ever been in a battle. But, as we've already read, when a lion or a bear came and stole the sheep, David went into battle with the lion and the bear and whooped him and got the sheep back. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it and killed it. Your servant, this is verse 36, your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine. David remembered what God had done. He remembered that God had protected him when he was fighting lions and bears. And on the basis of that, he trusted God to fight against the Philistines. This is why I think it's important to realize that David isn't just some random small boy. He's somebody that God had been preparing for this moment. Somebody who God had been getting ready by giving him experiences. You know, a lion and a bear are pretty scary, but they're not as scary as Simon standing on a table with a dirty great sword. That's terrifying, the image. But God had prepared David with lions and with bears so that when the next challenge could come, David was ready for it. Now, I don't know what giants you're facing in your life, what struggles you're going through. All of us do face struggles. But as we face them, we need to be like David and remember what God has done in the past. How has God got you to where you are today? How has God worked in your life, preparing you for the challenges you're facing? Don't focus on the scary giants. And the giants are scary. Focus on the lions and the bears and the God who got you through those and will get you to the next stage. Talking about Ebenezer's, it's an old-fashioned word, isn't it? Sort of sounds very Victorian or 1990s drug culture for those who are of that age. But Ebenezer, it's an odd word. But this idea of putting a memorial to remember what God has done is a good one. It can be quite helpful sometimes to keep a notebook or a file and just write down times when you've been encouraged, when you've seen God at work in your life, when something's happened, so that you can turn back to it when you face the giants. Write down the lions and the bears, so that when you come to the giants, you've got that to remember. Saul had everything going for him. He'd led the army to victory after victory against the Philistines. He'd seen God breaking in, and he flunked because he forgot. David had nothing going for him militarily, but he remembered that God could help him, and he was the one who succeeded. So, got the Philistine army one side, Israelite army the other side, big giant, scaring them. The Israelites don't want to fight. Saul has just abrogated responsibility. He's just not doing his job as king. David comes along and said, basically, I may not know anything about being a soldier, but God's kept me safe when there were lions and bears. I reckon he'll keep me safe when I face this Philistine. And you know what happens. David, they try on the armor. David says, never used this before, not used to it. Tries walking around now. So he just goes out as a shepherd with his stick and his sling and his bag, picks up 5 stones, steps out. Goliath yells at him, mocks him, who are you? And then David whirls around his sling, fires a stone smack into Goliath's forehead. Goliath falls down. David goes, gets Goliath's sword, chops Goliath's head off, and goes back carrying Goliath's head. If all we remember from that is that if you remember what God has done in the past to encourage you when you face challenges in the present and in the future, that's a great lesson. Remember the lions and the bears, and they'll help you when you face the giants. However, with all due respect to David, we know a bit more than he did. David was an Old Testament character, and we have the New Testament. The Bible tells us that we face many enemies. We have a constant struggle with temptations that come from the outside. We have our own sinful nature, which basically wants to destroy us. And we face an enemy in Satan who wants to devour us. As it's sometimes put, we face the world, the flesh, and the devil. We have big enemies. We have giants. And the temptation would be to take the David story and think, well, God's helped me with that temptation. I can deal with the next one. The thing is, if you rely on your own strength, the giants will overcome you. They'll push you down. It's not enough just to think, well, I've dealt with the lions and bears, I can take on the giants. We have to remember that the giants are dead already. Jesus has destroyed them. That's why we've not been singing any songs about David and Goliath. We've been singing songs about Christ's victory, because he has already taken on the lions and the bears. Just a couple of verses. 1 Corinthians 15:57. But thank God, he gives us victory over sin and death through our Lord Jesus Christ. He gives us victory over sin and death through our Lord Jesus Christ. Death is the biggest giant we face. We will all, at some point, unless the Lord returns, have to face that giant. And you know what? In your own strength, you ain't going to beat it. Nobody has so far. But Jesus has given us victory over sin and death. He has slain that giant. Sin, our own desire to do things that we shouldn't do, that mess up our lives, the selfishness, the self-centeredness, just the messed upness that's inside us. We all struggle with that. And Paul tells us Jesus has dealt with that. And the way he dealt with that was by taking the punishment that we deserve. When he died on the cross, Jesus didn't deserve to die. But when he died, he took the punishment that we are due for our messed up nature so that we can be forgiven. When he died on the cross, on the third day, he rose again, beating death. If you know and love Jesus, death is a scary giant. I'm in no hurry to go through that process. It's nasty and it's unpleasant. But there is victory at the other side. Not through us, but through Jesus. Colossians 2:15. It's one of my favorite verses. It's a bit odd one to have as a favorite verse. But having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. Having disarmed the powers and authorities, it's Paul is basically saying at this point, look, Jesus has beaten death. He's beaten Satan. He's beaten all of the giants that we face. And he's made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. The images of a Roman general or an emperor who, having won a big victory, would come back to Rome, leading all of the captives, leading the enemies that they defeated in a parade. So you'd have the general on his horse or on a chariot, and then all the kings and other people that they defeated in chains coming behind, making a spectacle of them. And that's what Jesus has done. He's demonstrated to the whole world by rising again that our enemies, our giants, are ultimately defeated. You know, David took Goliath's head. It's not a nice image, but he took Goliath's head and carried it around. Why? To show that Goliath was really dead. He isn't getting up after this. It's over. And when Jesus rose from the dead, he was making just as much a demonstration that the giants that attack us are ultimately defeated. Now, make no mistake, even though Jesus is beaten the giants, they're still roaming around trying to get a bit. I hadn't actually planned on having dramatic music for the end of the sermon, but if we could have some swelling violins, if that didn't come across online, just some music came up there. We will face giants. We will face them. But our task isn't the impossible one of a small boy having to face an impossible giant. We are people who God has been preparing by the work of his Spirit in our lives for the tests and the temptations that we will face. God has been in work in your life since you first turned to him, and he is preparing you and challenging you, because it's when you face the giants that you really grow. But God is there with you. And the small victories should remind us of the big victories. It is important to do the Ebenezer thing, to remember. But the most important thing to remember is the giants have been defeated. They may mess you up. Your own sinful nature can make your life a misery. Attacks of the evil one can be really difficult. You may face opposition from other people that just makes you miserable. There are times when the giants will seem to be winning, and it can be hard. It can be really hard. But ultimately, they've lost. The big lesson isn't that because of our great faith like David, we can go out and beat the giants. The big lesson is that Jesus has done it already. And we need to remember that as we face him. Remembering things is good. I think one of the things that always strikes me when we take communion is how God knows that we forget. And communion, in a sense, is an Ebenezer. It's a reminder of what God did. You'd never forget that Christ died for you, would you? Well, I do regularly. But you come to the table and you're reminded, and it's brought back front and center again. Remembering is great, but the thing that we remember is that he has beaten the giants already. And just one last thought, if the giants are too big and you're thinking, I can't deal with all the problems that my life has got, I'm out of control, there's just too much going on. Can I ask, just gently but sincerely, have you committed yourself? Have you trusted Jesus, the one who's beaten the giants? Because if you're still trying to do it on your own, you're never going to manage. But if you trust Jesus, he's already managed